Number 1. I grew up in a small town. Total population was maybe 2,000. Everybody knew everyone else, or at least knew your family members. It was a safe town with mostly middle-class working families. Nothing major ever happened and the crime rates were low. I grew up feeling safe and secure. To note, I grew up in the 90s. One summer day, my good friend Jenny and I were out for a bike ride. We were 11 or 12 years old. We were allowed to bike anywhere we wanted as long as we didn't leave our town and wore our helmets. There was a new road being constructed in between the two main neighborhoods. The new road was to provide a shorter way of accessing the main road to get to the next town. At the time, the road was still under construction but was nearly complete. All that was left was paving and painting. Jenny and I decided to bike down the gravel road. Jenny and I were about halfway down the road, and the road was about 1 kilometer long. At the halfway point, we noticed a man walking. He was in his early 30s and very handsome. I didn't recognize him, and Jenny didn't either, and as we got closer, he broke out in a big smile and said hello. We said hello back as he didn't seem threatening or scary. He asked us if we were having a good summer, and we said yes. He told Jenny and I that he was a photographer from a nearby city and was in town to scout out models for his new postcard company. He said Jenny and I had beautiful features. He said everything in a very flattering way that made us feel special, and he said that we could be models. He asked if he could take our pictures, and he said we had the look he wanted and the scenery right now is perfect to promote the town. He said he knows he will sell tons of postcards and we could all make money. Jenny and I eagerly agreed. He got us to stand with our hands on our hips and smile big. He took a disposable camera out of his back pocket and began snapping photos. He took about 10 photos from many different angles. I remember feeling a little uneasy and said that we should probably go because we needed to be home soon. He said he would get in touch with our principal on the first day of school to give us some money from the postcard sales. We foolishly confirmed we went to the local elementary school, though it was the only elementary school in town, so it wouldn't be hard to figure it out. Neither Jenny or I remember to this day giving him our names, and this is an important detail for later. Jenny and I talked about becoming famous on the way home. I told Jenny that I wondered why he didn't have a professional camera. She said she wondered that too, but we agreed cameras are expensive, so maybe he didn't have a nice one with him in case it rained. That evening at supper, I told my parents about my potential newfound fame. They were horrified and got on the phone with Jenny's parents. The two sets of parents called the police and gave statements. The police sort of downplayed it and said it was unusual, but nothing criminal had happened. My parents had a long talk to me about safety, as did Jenny's parents with her. The following spring, Jenny and I were hanging out together, this time a little older and a little wiser and a lot more cautious. We were walking along a quiet side street just talking about music and TV shows. A minivan approached us and slowed down. A friendly-looking woman asked us if we knew where Smith's Road was. We told her that she just needed to drive straight for less than a minute, and it's the first right-hand turn. She said that she was having difficulty finding it, and would we mind hopping in and showing her. I instantly said no, and Jenny also declined. Then the woman said it was okay because she knows who we were. She called us both by our first name and said she saw us on a postcard. By now we were both freaked out. We were on a stretch of the road that had no houses. The nearest one was about 100 meters away, and it wasn't common for people to have cell phones back then, so neither Jenny or I had one. The woman continued to ask us to get in her minivan. Jenny, who is normally super chatty, was staring into the vehicle intensely. Her body language was stiff, and I could tell she was scared. Suddenly, and seemingly out of nowhere, Jenny screamed, "Run!" I didn't know what was happening, but I ran and I followed Jenny. We ran off the road and through a field and into a yard another street over. I recognized the yard and house as belonging to a school teacher. We pounded on her door and she answered. and we told her what happened. And then Jenny said something I will never forget. She said she saw the photographer man from last summer crouching down in the very back row of the seats in the van, and she said she knew something bad was going to happen. Police and our parents were called. We gave statements and a vehicle description, as well as descriptions of the man and woman. Unfortunately, the police were never able to locate them. Jenny and I never saw them again, and we had some serious trust issues with strangers after those encounters, and I had nightmares of being kidnapped into my early adulthood. Always make sure to teach your children that strangers are not safe, no matter how nice they are. My situation could have had a much more unfortunate outcome if things had gone even slightly differently. Number 2. I was 8 or 9 at the time. I was an extremely skinny, small little girl for my age. I hung out at the very bottom of my height and weight charts at the doctor's office. Adults would often mistake me for a child of 6, which I absolutely hated. It was summer, and my mom was home making lunch. I asked to go ride my bike. The rule was not around the block, just to the corner and back, and we lived in a very small, quiet town on a street that hardly ever had traffic, unless it was the neighbors coming and going. My corner was about 8 houses down from my own house. I was cruising along on my new bike, and I didn't quite hit the bumpy spot in the sidewalk correctly, and I crashed pretty hard. I was laying there all twisted around my bike, shaking. My helmet had fallen off because I never buckled the bottom strap. To be cool. I felt all shaky, and then I was worried I'd get in trouble for not buckling my helmet and assuming my mom saw me. Maybe 30 seconds passed and a car drove up to me at that corner. I hear a car stop and a man's voice said, "Oh honey, are you okay?" I was trying not to cry by this point. I look up expecting a neighbor, and I see a stranger. The man looked dirty, and you could see all kind of garbage inside his car. The garbage was right up all the way to the windows, and the car was rusty. He had pulled his car right over in such a way that he was almost right on the sidewalk in front of me. He had stayed in his car, but he was leaning all the way out of his driver's side window, and his door was a little open looking at me. And then he said, "Come on, I'll take care of you." I lied and said I wasn't hurt. He got angry with me and said he'd just take me home. I remembered thinking, where would I sit? I said to him, "I'm not hurt." Then he said, "If you're not hurt, you have to prove it." So I took all my strength and I untangled my legs and stood up. Then the man gave me a terribly angry look and peeled out and disappeared. I was so scared that I took my shaky legs and I ran home crying. I left my helmet and my bike laying there. I told my mother what happened, and she walked down and grabbed my bike and helmet after lunch. As an adult, I remember I asked her if she remembered about that incident. She told me that when she had walked to the corner to grab my things, she saw the tire tracks right up to the sidewalk. The car had pulled way over across, where I must have fallen, and it also blocked me from the view of anyone driving by. She thought maybe the man would have kidnapped me, but she wasn't sure. I was told that he probably just wanted to help. Then I was told again not to talk to strangers. If I need help, then I can only talk to a mom with her children. I think that the dirty-looking man wanted to take me. He probably saw what he thought was a 5 or 6-year-old and was disappointed when I wasn't young enough and hurt enough to easily get picked up. It still creeps me out thinking about how angry he got at me. If he'd been a little bit nicer, I might not be alive today. Number 3. This is one of those close call stories. I had been around 9 or 10 years old when this happened. In October of 2006, a mother of 2 kids I went to school with had went missing on one of the bike paths that ran through our town. Initially, the police had suspected it was her husband, but they ended up finding her body a few yards off the bike path, and everything was consistent with 3 murders that had occurred in the 90s on a bike path in a town 15 minutes from mine. They had arrested a man for those murders without conclusive evidence. Anyway, my story happened about 3 weeks before this woman went missing. My dad and I were walking on the same bike path that goes through my town, behind our high school, and it was only 5 minutes from my old house. We always came walking up here with our golden retriever named Aspen. Off of this bike path was a hill, and sometimes we would go down it and walk along the woods towards a meadow. My dad decided he was going to take my dog down it so she could run it a few times, because she liked doing it, and it would give her some cardio. Anyway, my dad went down the hill, and for whatever reason, I decided to stay up. I'm standing there for a few minutes just looking around when a man with a German Shepherd walks up to me. He starts asking me how I'm doing, and if this is my favorite bike path. I answer him, but I was hesitant because I had always been taught stranger danger, but I didn't want to be rude. While he's talking to me, 2 women walk by us, and he asks me if they're my parents. I say no, and he asked me if I would walk with him and his dog for a bit because he liked talking to me. I started getting really nervous and I said no, but he kept insisting that I come with him. Finally, my 10-year-old head is like, this is enough, and I started screaming bloody murder for my dad, and he runs up with my dog while this guy gives my dad a quick look as he started getting to the top of the hill. And he starts running away with his dog. I'm crying hysterics while my dad is calming me down and calling 911. One cop who was on duty was near our location and he came up to us, and he had a few guys on the lookout for this guy. My best description for them, other than the dog, was that he was a bit taller with a beard and darker features. They never found the guy. Fast forward a few weeks and this woman goes missing. They end up finding her and get a bunch of DNA evidence. Find out that this guy lives in a few towns away. Matches DNA with the murders from the 90s, and it's the same guy. He killed this woman and those other women. He lived an average life with a wife and kids. No one ever suspected him of doing it. The guy that they had arrested in the 90s was released and given tons of compensation, but when they released the guy's face on TV, who was it? Of course, none other than the creep who tried to take me with him on the bike path. It made both my dad and I sick when we saw his picture, and we still talk about it to this day. Number 4. I'm a biologist and frequently am by myself in remote locations. This occurred when I was 26 and somewhere between green and seasoned. I was surveying wetlands in a remote area of the Appalachians in an area dominated by thick pine forests. I always got on the country assessor site and printed off a map with landowner information so I wouldn't trespass. That'll get you shot. At this particular site, there was a private driveway going through U.S. Forest Service land, which is public, that let me get to this area a little quicker. This driveway was absolutely public property, and at no point did I trespass. I pulled onto this road, clearly created by the USFS, and pulled off to the side about 30 yards from his private entry gate. My vehicle was clearly marked state government vehicle. The forest is an old growth with pine, but on the outer edges of the forest it's thick with undergrowth, forming kind of a wall before you get under the pines, in a nice open understory. I walk about 200 yards in when nature calls, and I like to make a bear in the woods and do my business. I'm a biologist, no biggie. Midway through, I hear yelling back at my truck. I think, great, now I have to deal with this. I'm wrapping up my business, getting ready to walk back to the truck, and I hear gunshots. I stopped walking and thought, yeah, I'm not walking back to that. I was at a loss of what exactly to do and stood there for about a minute considering my options when I heard him breaking through the undergrowth on the edge of the forest. Shit, he's coming into the woods. Again, this is public property. I got a bad vibe. This is absolutely the type of area where people just straight up disappear, and they do. It's very, very remote, and the communities are very closed, and this county has more than double the amount of game wardens of other counties for a very good reason. I take off in a crouching jog, using my sense of direction to make it out to the main road about 600 yards away. More gunshots, except these have a crack to them. And that usually means they're coming in my direction. There's no way he sees me, but maybe he's hearing me. Maybe he's firing above my head. Adrenaline kicks in 100% now, and I'm moving with a mix of terror and urgency to get to the main road. I eventually get to the main road and hide under a bridge. I call a colleague to give him the details of where I'm at so they can at least find my body, and then I call 911. And this was the first time in my life I'd ever called 911. The 911 operator doesn't believe me, but eventually I get in touch with the deputy, and he doesn't believe me either. They're probably just shooting at tin cans. Bullshit, it's Sunday night around 7 p.m., and he's too lazy to get off his ass. I move further away into a public hunting area, and a game warden stops in. God bless him. He took me seriously, and a few locals come by and comment how that landowner is an asshole. He was from Louisiana, and not a local. I got along well with all the locals I had encountered, so that made more sense. After an hour, the deputy gives me a ride back to my state vehicle. The son of a bitch is parked on an ATV with a rifle laid across his lap, waiting for me in the dark. The deputy and I get out of the car, and I walk straight to my truck and leave. It's almost 9 p.m. and I have a 4-hour drive to get home. And I had just had enough. At the time, I didn't want to talk to the guy at all, but now I wish I had. Who knows what conversation the deputy and him had. After this, I quietly started carrying a firearm in the field with me at all times. I'm glad I trusted my gut feeling and insisted on a police escort back to my vehicle. That was not an encounter or conversation I wanted to have with someone with an overly active trigger finger. I had all the guy's contact information from county assessor site and thought about mailing him a map clearly stating where his property begins and ends, but I just let it go. Maybe he thought I was the creep, so displaced Louisianian, let's not meet. Number 5. My mom was always very cautious of the bad things that could happen to her children. She would take all 3 of us, my brother, sister, and I, to school in the morning, as she worked close to the same time school started. I had been begging to bike to school since I got a new bike for my birthday a few months earlier, and she finally agreed. I was in grade 7, so 12 or 13 years old, and female. My school was a 2 to 3 minute drive and around a 10 to 15 minute bike ride from our house. I was eager to ride my new bike to school, as I had also gotten a new helmet and bike lock to go with it. School started at 8:30 to 9ish, so I left around 8. I liked to hang out in the yard with my friends before school started, so I would always go earlier. The route to school was pretty much one straight line down one main road in my city. But now it's 8 o'clock in the morning, so it's relatively bright outside, and again, I'm on a well-populated main road around the time everyone is headed to work and or school. So I'm about halfway to school and I decide to cross the street, but not at a crosswalk or traffic light, just kinda jaywalking or biking, if you will. As I'm stopped in someone's driveway looking both ways to cross, I notice a black car pull up to my left and park on the side of the road. It's a 2-door Honda Civic type looking car from what I can remember. I'm 21 years old now, and all of the windows were tinted. I didn't think much of it, but the only thing that crossed my mind was maybe I was blocking them from getting in their driveway, so I continued on trying to cross the street. From the corner of my eye, I see a man, dressed in all black with his hood pulled up to hide his face, get out of the driver's side and walk around the back of the car to the passenger's side before I get the chance to realize what's happening. And then he started opening the passenger side door and is pulling me by the arm off my bike in an attempt to put me in his car. And for what felt like forever, it was like every car in the street had disappeared, and any sign of help was completely gone. One of the busiest streets in my city felt like a gravel road in the middle of nowhere, with nothing to be seen for miles. It also felt like one of those awful nightmares where you try to scream but nothing comes out, so you're just silently suffering until you finally wake up. But it was real. I couldn't scream. I can't explain that feeling any better than a nightmare, but not being able to wake up from it. These things didn't happen in my city, so I wasn't prepared for what to do in a situation like this, so I did the first thing that came to mind. I aimed for the nuts. I shifted my weight to my right leg and I kicked as hard as I possibly could with my left, and I landed one kick which I recall actually really hurt my ankle a little bit, so I can only imagine what it feels like on the receiving end, and he actually let go of me. I didn't even look before I crossed the street, biking as fast as I possibly could. I remember trying to turn around to get a license plate, but my eyes were watery from the tears streaming from them, and it still felt like making any noise was impossible. I knew my mom would have been at work by now, so I just continued biking to school, silently crying the entire way. I pulled into the schoolyard and dropped my bike. I didn't care to lock it or ever ride it anywhere again, frankly. My school's front door was locked 24/7 and you had to ring a doorbell to get in, so I did exactly that. The secretary reminded me that I still had time to play outside before class started, and that's when I was finally able to speak again. "I need to call my mom," I screamed, and the door opened instantly. I explained what happened to the secretary, then the principal, my mom, and finally the police, who I had refused to talk to until I spoke with my mom. The police arrived at the school shortly and took my statement. Then I went to the station after school to make another with my mom. A business from across the street where it happened had video surveillance, but it only captured the bottom 6 inches of the guy's car pulling up, his footsteps around the back of his car, and then the car pulling away shortly after. Basically no solid leads onto who this asshole was or is. The same guy with the same body description and car description went on to kidnap 3 other girls but was still never caught. And I don't really believe in a God, but I do pray that he was or is never successful, so